The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, casting a sickly pallor across the cracked walls of the county courthouse. Dust floated lazily in shafts of light cutting through high windows. The benches were filled with restless spectators, some curious locals, others family members of defendants, but all waiting for something to wake them from the long, dragging hours of a Monday morning docket. Then the courtroom doors creaked open. A man in a blue suit with a sharp jawline and a voice sharpened by years of prosecution stood and stepped forward, papers in one hand, fury in the other. "Your Honor," he said without looking up. "State of Missouri versus Neil Bradford. Felony breaking and entering, theft of prescription medication." The judge, a graying man who had long stopped expecting justice in his courtroom, sighed and motioned toward the bailiff. "Bring in the defendant." Footsteps echoed. Every conversation in the room dimmed. What kind of man, the unspoken question swirled, would steal medication? The answer came slowly, dragging one foot slightly behind the other, leaning heavily on a cane. He was older than anyone expected. Neil Bradford wore a threadbare jacket with holes near the cuffs. His left pant leg was pinned and folded, the place where his leg had once been. His shoulders hunched forward, his eyes locked on the scuffed floor. And above his heart, pinned with quiet pride, was a Marine Corps badge dulled with time. Gasps fluttered through the courtroom. This wasn't some hardened thief. This was a man who looked like he belonged in a hospice, not a holding cell. "Stand up, thief!" the prosecutor barked suddenly, jabbing a finger at him with theatrical flair. The judge blinked but said nothing. Neil didn't flinch. He just straightened, slowly, with effort, pain clearly etched into his joints, and faced the crowd. His back wasn't entirely upright, but he stood. The air tightened. The silence swallowed all murmurs. "Let them see the man who stole from a child's hands," the prosecutor added, savoring each word like a headline. And with that, the courtroom became a jury of spectators, hungry for justice, but unsure what justice looked like anymore. From the back row, someone whispered, "That's him." Another voice replied, "Yeah. Broke into a Walgreens or something." A woman clutched her purse tighter. "Looks like he should be in a nursing home. Lock him up already." Neil didn't acknowledge the crowd. He'd heard worse. For decades, he had walked streets that crossed through neighborhoods that didn't remember or care what he had done in Vietnam. There was a time when he'd worn that uniform like armor. Now, he wore survival like a second skin. Every wrinkle, every scar, every limping step, it was all part of the toll paid long after the war ended. The judge studied him with faint curiosity. The bailiff stood awkwardly to the side, unsure if he should help the man stay upright or simply follow procedure. Neil's court-appointed jumpsuit looked like it had been made for a man twice his size. It hung off his skeletal frame, giving him the appearance of someone slowly disappearing from the world. The prosecutor flipped a page in his binder. "He stole insulin meant for children. 2 vials. Shattered the pharmacy door in the middle of the night. Surveillance shows him limping inside at 2:14 a.m. He said it like it was a military report, cold, clinical, unfeeling. What he didn't say, what nobody bothered to say, was that Neil had turned himself in less than 6 hours later. He hadn't tried to flee. He hadn't pawned the vials. He simply walked, still in pain, bleeding slightly from his hands where glass had cut him, and told the nearest precinct what he'd done. He had no record, no lawyer, no voice. Until she arrived. The courtroom was already forming its own conclusions. People weren't just whispering, they were shaping verdicts. The public, wrapped in their own bitterness or boredom, pointed mental fingers and buried the man without needing a trial. That's what happens when you let criminals off easy. Bet he's done worse and just never got caught. Old doesn't mean innocent. They didn't know about the house he once owned and lost. About the medals collecting dust in a shoebox under a bunk in the shelter. About the nights he ate once so his daughter could feed her kids twice. To them, Neil was just another headline with legs. But still, he stood, silent, proud in his own way, refusing to meet their eyes not out of shame, but to protect them from seeing how deeply they had already wounded him. His hands, calloused and cracked, gripped the cane tighter. His lips pressed into a line. He didn't cry. Didn't beg. That stoicism made some people scoff. "He's not even sorry," someone muttered. But he wasn't standing for them. He was standing for something else. For someone else. Then the courtroom doors opened again. It was as if the temperature shifted. Conversation ceased. Attention snapped like magnets to the woman who entered. Blonde hair pulled into a sleek bun. Gray suit tailored to the inch. Eyes that didn't dart, they drilled. She wasn't from around here. That much was obvious. There was an edge to her stride, like a city lawyer walking into a country town, a lioness stepping into a den of jackals. She carried a single leather bag and moved with purpose, heels striking the tile in rhythmic defiance. Click, click, click. Some eyebrows rose. Some scoffed. But everyone noticed her. She didn't stop to look at the audience or acknowledge the tension. She walked straight to the defense table, set her bag down, and glanced at the man beside her. Her jaw tensed. Her chest rose with a silent breath. Then she turned toward the bench. "Permission to address the court, Your Honor?" Her voice was clear, strong, not loud, but undeniable. The judge blinked, not expecting such command in a young public defender. The prosecutor rolled his eyes. "She's the defense attorney, Judge. Let her speak. Let's get this over with." The judge nodded. "You may proceed, Ms. Harper." Rebecca Harper. She gave no smile. Just turned, slowly, toward the jury box. "You've heard he stole medication," she began, walking to the edge of the jury box. "But have you heard why?" She let the question settle in the air like dust before moving forward. "Because if you haven't, I suggest you sit back. Because this story is not what it seems." The jurors leaned in slightly. The gallery hushed. The bailiff crossed his arms and watched her carefully. Rebecca Harper was not a public defender by choice. She was one by principle. Educated at Columbia, trained at one of the most cutthroat firms in New York, she had walked away from a six-figure salary to work cases like this. Cases where justice wasn't obvious, where the truth had to be pried loose from the jaws of a broken system. She didn't take every case seriously. But she took this one personally. "This man is 76 years old," she said, gesturing gently to Neil, who now watched her with quiet confusion. "He's not a criminal. He's a decorated Marine. He served this country in a war most of us have only read about in textbooks. 3 tours in Vietnam. Lost a leg to a mine. Spent months in a VA hospital while his friends were buried in places he couldn't attend." A few jurors exchanged glances. Rebecca kept going. "When he came home, he didn't get a hero's welcome. He got spit on. Protesters called him a baby killer. Employers passed him over. Benefits were delayed, then denied. But he didn't complain. He found work where he could. He built a family. He raised 2 children after cancer took his wife." Rebecca Harper stood in the center of the courtroom like it was a battlefield, steady, composed, yet visibly swelling with intensity. Her voice lowered but never wavered. "He turned himself in, ladies and gentlemen, with no mask, no plan, no escape route. He wasn't trying to run. He was trying to save a life." She reached slowly into her bag and pulled out a worn, creased photograph. The edges were frayed. The colors faded. But the image still told the story better than words ever could. She held it up. A little girl, maybe 8 or 9, lay in a hospital bed. Her blonde hair was matted against her forehead, for tubes trailing from both arms. Despite it all, she smiled faintly at the camera, holding a brown teddy bear so tight it looked like her last lifeline. "This," Rebecca said, her voice catching for just a moment, "is who he stole for." Neil's eyes didn't leave the floor. He knew the photo. He'd carried it in his wallet before they took his things. Rebecca turned back to the jury. "She's his granddaughter. Her name is Daisy. She's alive today because of those 2 vials. They bought her time until the family could get help." The silence in the courtroom was now reverent. Even the judge had stopped fiddling with his pen. Jurors stared at the image like it was a relic from a sacred text. Something about that little girl, so small and fragile, against the backdrop of a life sacrificed to keep her breathing, it stirred something deep in every onlooker. "I'm not asking you to ignore the law," Rebecca continued, more slowly now. "I'm asking you to consider what the law is for. Is it to punish blindly? Or is it to protect people from injustice, even when that injustice doesn't come with handcuffs, but with denial letters and empty bank accounts? The silence lingered longer than the prosecutor liked. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor, and walked to the front of the court, straightening his cuffs as if armor had come loose. "Compelling story," he said with a hollow smile. "But let's not forget, this is still a crime." His voice carried again, louder than necessary. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was premeditated theft. Breaking and entering. Endangering others. What if someone had been in that store? What if this inspires more people to break in, thinking their reasons are noble too? He paced, confident, rehearsed. If we start excusing crimes based on emotion, then we might as well throw out every statute we've written. Yes, it's sad. Yes, he's old. Yes, he served this country. But does that give him the right to shatter glass and take what he wants? He turned to the jury. Imagine if every sob story let someone walk free. What kind of message do we send? There was a flicker of agreement in one juror's eyes. Another looked away. Rebecca didn't respond immediately. She let his words hang, like smoke from a fire, waiting for the courtroom to inhale their sting. Then she stepped forward, face flushed but voice calm. "You want to talk about messages?" she asked, her tone like steel under silk. "Let's talk." Rebecca turned fully to the jury again, drawing a slow breath. Something had shifted in her. The attorney mask had slipped, and what was left behind was something raw, furious, compassionate, unstoppable. What message did we send when Neil Bradford came home in a wheelchair and couldn't get a job? She didn't wait for an answer. What message did we send when the VA told him to wait 6 months for an appointment while he coughed up blood from exposure to Agent Orange? Her voice was rising now, not in volume, but in force, like thunder rolling low across the plains. What message did we send when his granddaughter needed insulin to survive and the system told her no, twice, because her mom couldn't afford a better plan? She stepped forward, eyes blazing. And what message do we send now if we tell this man, this Marine, that trying to save a child's life makes him a criminal? She pointed at Neil, not accusingly, but like she was asking the room to look at him for the first time. 3 tours in Vietnam. 1 leg left. No pension, no retirement, no medals on parade. Just one act of desperation because no one else would step in. Because he couldn't watch her die. Her voice cracked, but only slightly. "And now you want to make an example of him? For what? Compassion?" The courtroom was completely still. Even the prosecutor, lips tight, didn't speak. Rebecca walked over to Neil slowly, then turned him gently to face the court. Then, with one breathless moment, she said, "Neil." He looked at her, confused. "Neil." Neil's brows furrowed. He leaned on his cane. His body trembled, unsure if he understood. "Neil, why?" Rebecca gave a gentle nod. And slowly, with the help of his hand gripping the defense table, Neil lowered himself to one knee. It took effort. He grunted softly, jaw tight. His right leg bent with difficulty. The left pant leg, pinned above the stump, stayed still. The courtroom watched in stunned silence. Rebecca turned to the jury. "This is the position he took the day he was awarded the Silver Star," she said quietly. "After saving 5 of his men under fire, despite being wounded himself." She turned to the judge. "And today, this court has made him kneel like a criminal." Then she looked back at the room, locking eyes with one juror after another. "I ask you honestly, who deserves to kneel before whom?" Gasps broke from the crowd. One juror, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and watery eyes, covered his mouth. Another removed her glasses and began to cry softly. The image of a man who had once defended his country, now brought to his knees by it, was too much. Neil, kneeling with quiet dignity, was no longer a defendant. He was a question, a challenge, a mirror. From the very back row of the courtroom, a small voice broke the heavy quiet like a pebble tossed into a still pond. "Grandpa!" Every head turned. A little girl stepped into the aisle, clutching the same teddy bear from the photo Rebecca had shown. Her face was pale, framed by golden curls. She wore a simple dress and pink sneakers, one untied. Her eyes were wide and shimmering with recognition and love. Her mother, seated near the back, reached for her, panicked. "Daisy, no." But it was too late. Daisy ran forward, her steps quick and uneven. She crossed the length of the courtroom like it was a playground, dodging benches, brushing past a stunned bailiff. And she flung herself into Neil's arms. He caught her as best he could, arms wrapping around her with trembling strength. He buried his face in her hair. She clutched his neck like she was afraid someone would take him away. The courtroom was utterly silent, a space where even breath felt like a disruption. Then, slowly, one juror stood. Then another. Then another. Until the entire jury box was on its feet. Even the judge stood, his gavel untouched, his eyes glassy. The prosecutor sat frozen, unsure of what he was witnessing. His mouth opened, but no words came. Neil didn't speak. He just held Daisy, rocking gently, as if every ache and scar and broken moment had been worth this single embrace. And then the verdict was read. No prison. No fines. Just time served. The gavel struck once. The crowd erupted, not in applause, but in quiet awe. Heads bowed. Hands wiped tears. And when Rebecca helped Neil to his feet and handed him his cane, strangers moved aside like they were making way for royalty. As the old man limped out of the courtroom with his granddaughter in his arms, a spectator leaned over to another and whispered, "That woman!" The gavel still echoed faintly through the courtroom like the aftershock of a quake. Time served. 2 simple words. But they felt like a tectonic shift. The judge leaned back in his chair, his eyes no longer cold and distant but troubled, haunted even. He had not looked at Neil once during the entire verdict reading. But now, as the veteran helped himself to his feet, still cradling Daisy, the judge let his gaze drop, and didn't look away. He had sons of his own. Grandchildren. He remembered a time when men like Neil were paraded through airports and spit on, told their service had been shameful. He'd once walked past a homeless veteran outside a subway and done nothing. Now he realized, he'd just judged that same man. Rebecca moved beside Neil, putting one hand gently on his arm. "You okay?" He nodded but didn't speak. He couldn't. Words were too small for what was flooding through his heart. Relief, shame, love, a kind of grace that felt almost impossible after the months of humiliation. A slow, respectful hush lingered as jurors collected their things. Many of them looked back over their shoulders at Neil, some offering brief nods or soft smiles, acknowledgments of something they hadn't expected to find that day, dignity in a defendant. The prosecutor remained seated, unmoving. His fingers tapped nervously on the desk. For all his training, all his logic, he hadn't won. Not just the case, he'd lost the room. 30 minutes later, as courthouse staff began dimming lights and shuffling papers, Rebecca stepped into the hallway. The sun had started to sink outside, casting long shadows through the glass-paneled windows. Neil and Daisy had already gone. A quiet exit, escorted by family. No reporters. No crowd. But the prosecutor was still there. He leaned against the wall beside the clerk's office, arms crossed, staring at the floor. He looked up as Rebecca approached. "You really think you saved him?" he asked. Rebecca stopped, resting her briefcase against her leg. "I think he saved her. I just told the story." The prosecutor shook his head. "This isn't how the system works." "No," she said. "It's how it should work." He laughed bitterly. "You're going to have people breaking into pharmacies now, thinking they'll get a hug from the jury." She leaned in slightly, her voice calm and low. "And maybe one of them will be trying to save someone too. Maybe the next time, someone listens before it comes to that." He didn't reply. She turned to go. "Rebecca," he called. She stopped. "I was wrong about you," he said. "I thought you were just another bleeding heart defender. But you came in with a sword." She gave a faint, tired smile. "It was never about me. That man spent his whole life being told to be strong. Today, he needed someone to speak." Then she walked away, heels clicking quietly down the hallway. No cameras. No applause. Just the sound of justice, finally spoken aloud. 2 days later, the city stood under a gray sky, drizzling mist across granite sidewalks and iron fences. At the edge of a downtown park, Neil stood before a towering stone memorial etched with names of the fallen. He wore his old Marine jacket, the same one he'd worn in court. Threadbare, faded, still dignified. Daisy stood beside him, her teddy bear tucked under one arm, the other hand wrapped tightly in his. They read the names together. Neil's finger traced a few he remembered, men lost decades ago. Friends who didn't come home. Friends who never had the chance to save their granddaughters. "She's proud of you, Grandpa," Daisy whispered. He looked down, his voice cracking. "I hope so. She said you're a hero." He squeezed her hand gently. "Heroes don't break into places. She said heroes do whatever it takes. That's what you did." For the first time in days, Neil let out a soft laugh. "She sounds smart." "She is. She's my mom." They stood together a long time. Not speaking. Just remembering. Just breathing. Sometimes, redemption doesn't need trumpets or flags. Sometimes, it just needs a quiet moment by the names of the fallen, with someone small holding your hand. Later that week, the story of the veteran and the vial, as a local journalist dubbed it, began to spread beyond the courthouse. A teacher shared it in a civics class. A father brought it up at the dinner table. A pastor spoke about it from the pulpit. People who hadn't cried in years found themselves blinking back tears in grocery lines as someone pulled up the article on their phone. It wasn't just the crime. It was the reason behind it. The quiet desperation. The sacrifice. The moment of courtroom reckoning when truth didn't just win, it rose. Donations started arriving, unasked, for the family. A diabetes nonprofit stepped in to assist Daisy's mother with insulin access and advocacy. Veterans groups reached out to Neil, offering assistance he hadn't asked for but finally accepted. And Rebecca. She received a single handwritten note. No return address. It said simply, "Thank you for reminding us what justice can look like." Signed, a juror. If you watched this story unfold and something stirred inside you, maybe a memory, maybe a sense of justice long buried, then this story was for you. Not just about an old man. Not just about a lawyer who dared to speak. But about a world that's not beyond saving. A world that still has people willing to kneel, not in shame, but in honor. Before we close, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And if this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and drop a comma in the comments below, because sometimes, a comma means there's more to the story. And we're not done yet.